They thought my silence was submission, just as they believed my $300 weekly stipend made me small enough to ignore. Standing in the shadow of the Larkview Conservatory, I listened to Maris turn my struggle into a cocktail party punchline. She didn't realize that while she was mocking the pennies I earned, I was already tracing the paper-thin lies holding up their $2.5 million legacy. I wasn't there to make a scene. I was there to keep the receipts. The paper check felt lighter than the cardstock it was printed on. I sat in my Ford Taurus in the parking lot of Brindle and Company Staffing, the engine idling rough against the damp October chill of Ashford Creek, and stared at the number on the pay stub. $300. It was not a salary. It was not a wage. It was, according to the 3-page contract I had signed with Shaking Hands 2 months ago, a probationary stipend, a flat weekly rate for candidates undergoing placement assessment. To the world, I was a 33-year-old payroll clerk with a decade of experience in accounts payable and ledger reconciliation. To Brindle and Company, I was inventory that had depreciated. I folded the check and slid it into my purse, right next to the electric bill I was pretending did not exist. You do not end up making $300 a week because you are stupid. You end up there because life has a way of eroding your foundations while you are busy trying to keep the roof from leaking. For me, the erosion had been a divorce that dragged on for 18 months, draining my savings account down to single digits, followed by a layoff from the textile mill that had been the heartbeat of this town for 60 years until it flatlined. I needed a job, any job, and in Ashford Creek, where the economic forecast was perpetually gray. Brindle and Company held the keys to the few corporate doors still open, so I took the stipend. I took the title of probationary placement. I took the humiliation because humiliation pays for groceries. Eventually, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was Ethan, running late. The text read, "Meet me at the entrance. Don't worry about the tickets." I put the car in reverse. Ethan Vale did not worry about tickets. Ethan Vale did not worry about stipends or electric bills or the price of gas. Ethan Vale was 35 years old, handsome in the way old money is handsome. Soft edges, easy smiles, and a hairline that refused to recede. And he was currently the only bright spot in a year that had been mostly darkness. We were going to the Larkview Conservatory for the Autumn Gala. It was a charity cocktail event benefiting the Ashford Arts Trust, the kind of gathering where the wine cost more than my weekly stipend and the conversation cost you your dignity if you were not careful. I drove home to Creston Row Flats to change. My apartment was clean, sparse, and quiet. I pulled my one good dress from the back of the closet, a navy blue sheath I had bought 5 years ago when I still thought my life was on an upward trajectory. It was a little loose now. Stress is a deeply effective diet. When I arrived at the conservatory, the air was already thick with humidity and expensive perfume. The glass walls of the Victorian structure glowed against the night sky, housing exotic ferns and palms that had no business growing in our rusted-out corner of the state. Ethan was waiting by the valet stand. He looked striking in a charcoal suit, his face lighting up when he saw me. He kissed my cheek, smelling of cedar and gin. "You look great." "Gabriella," he said, and for a moment, I let myself believe that I belonged there. We moved into the main atrium. The humidity hit me instantly, frizzing the hair I had spent 45 minutes straightening. Waiters circulated with silver trays of hors d'oeuvres that looked like architectural experiments. I took a glass of champagne because it was free and because I needed armor. Ethan's hand was warm on the small of my back, guiding me through the crowd. I recognized faces from the local papers, the mayor, the developers trying to gentrify the Rivermarch district, and inevitably, the Vales. Ethan's family was not just wealthy. They were foundational. They were the bedrock of Ashford Creek. His mother, Lorraine, sat on every board that mattered. His father had built Vale Meridian Holdings into a regional empire before passing the reins to a board of directors that still bowed to the family name. And then there was Maris. Maris Vale was Ethan's younger sister. Though she carried herself with the authority of a matriarch, she was standing near a massive bird of paradise plant, holding court with 3 other women who looked like they had been curated from a catalog of terrifyingly successful people. Maris wore emerald green silk. She looked sharp, dangerous, and expensive. Ethan steered us toward her. I felt my stomach tighten. "Maris," Ethan said, smiling. Maris turned. Her eyes scanned me, starting at my shoes and ending at my slightly frizzy hair. It took less than 2 seconds, but the assessment was complete. I had been weighed, measured, and found wanting. "Gabriella," Maris said. Her voice was a melodic purr. "We were just talking about the workforce crisis. It is simply impossible to find good administrative help these days. Everyone wants a director title for entry-level work." I kept my smile fixed. "I am sure it is a challenge." I said. Ethan squeezed my waist. "Gabriella is actually doing some contract work for Brindle right now, just until the right permanent thing opens up." Maris took a sip of her drink, her eyes never leaving mine. "Oh, that is right. Brindle. They handle the temporary staffing for the mill overflow, don't they? Very industrial. It is payroll reconciliation. Mainly," I said, keeping my voice level. "Fascinating," Maris said, in a tone that suggested it was anything but. She turned back to her circle, effectively dismissing me. Ethan, oblivious, or perhaps just relieved the interaction was over, pulled me toward the bar to get a refill. A few minutes later, Ethan got pulled into a conversation with a local zoning commissioner. I used the excuse to step away, needing to escape the suffocating warmth of the atrium. I found a quiet corner near the orchid display, sipping my champagne and trying to make myself invisible. I was not invisible enough. I heard Maris's voice before I saw her. She was on the other side of a dense wall of ferns, unaware I was just 5 feet away. "It is honestly tragic," Maris was saying. Her voice carried that distinct, projection-ready quality of someone who assumes everyone wants to hear them. "Ethan is just too soft. He picks up these strays." A woman laughed. "A stray? That is harsh." "Maris, is it?" Maris asked. "She is 33 years old and works on a stipend." "Darling, a stipend. Do you know what Brindle pays their probationary clerks?" I froze. My hand gripped the stem of my glass so hard I thought it might snap. $300 a week, Maris announced. I heard the number drop into the air like a stone. 300. My manicurist makes more than that in an afternoon. It is essentially an allowance for adults who failed at real life. The group laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound, brittle as sugar glass. "I feel bad for her." "Really?" Maris continued. "But it is embarrassing for Ethan. He is dragging her around like a charity project." I told him, "If you want to help the poor, write a check to the food bank. You do not have to date them." The heat in the conservatory suddenly felt unbearable. My face burned. I wanted to storm around the ferns and throw my champagne on her emerald silk. I wanted to scream that I had managed accounts for a company with 500 employees before the layoff. I wanted to tell her that my divorce had cost me everything because I refused to fight dirty. But I did not do any of those things. I was a woman making $300 a week in a room full of people who spent that on shoes. I had no leverage. I had no power. I turned and walked toward the restrooms, my heels clicking a sharp, steady rhythm on the stone floor. I pushed into the ladies' room, thankful it was empty. I went into the farthest stall and locked the door. Leaning my forehead against the cool metal, I breathed in, counting to 4, and breathed out, counting to 4. $300. She had turned my survival into a joke. The restroom door opened. 2 pairs of heels clattered in. The air shifted, filling with the scent of heavy floral perfume. "We need to move the pledges," a woman said. Her voice was low, urgent. "It is too early," another woman replied. "The audit is not until November. If we wait until November, the liquidity will not match the projection." The first woman snapped. I recognized the voice now. It was Paula Ketter, the director of the Ashford Arts Trust, the organization hosting this very party. I held my breath. "We cannot just book conditional pledges as secured assets." "Paula," the second woman said. She sounded younger, nervous. "That is not how accrual works. If the auditors see we moved the dates, they are not going to look at the metadata. Paula interrupted. They are looking for the total. The expansion breaks ground in January. We need the books to show we are fully funded by the end of this quarter. Just move the dates on the Larkview donors. The veils will cover the gap with the bridge arrangement if we get stuck. But the bridge arrangement, just do it, Paula hissed. We are talking about $2.5 million in public perception. We cannot look like we are stalling. The sound of running water masked the rest of the conversation. I heard the rustle of paper towels, the click of a purse snapping shut, and then the door opening and closing. I sat in the silence of the stall for a long time. I understood timing. I understood records. I spent my days staring at rows of data, looking for the story the numbers told. And what I had just heard was the prologue to a story that did not end well. Booking conditional pledges as secured, moving dates, bridge arrangements to cover gaps. In the world of accounting, these were not just errors, they were lies. I flushed the toilet to announce my presence to the empty room and walked to the sink. I washed my hands, looking at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, but my eyes were clear. Maris Vale thought I was a joke because I earned a stipend. But the people running her family's favorite charity were cooking the books to protect a $2.5 million reputation. I dried my hands. I went back out to the party, found Ethan, and smiled when he asked if I was having a good time. I am ready to go home, I said. The next morning, the alarm went off at 6. I dragged myself out of bed, the echo of Maris's laughter still ringing in my ears. At Brindle & Company, my supervisor, a harried woman named Brenda who smoked slim cigarettes in the loading dock, dropped a new stack of files on my desk. New assignment, Brenda said, not looking up from her clipboard. Vale Meridian Holdings needs a payroll recon. They did some internal reshuffling and their usual girl is on maternity leave. It is a mess. Just match the vendor codes to the reimbursements and flag anything that does not clear the approval logic. I stared at the folder. Vale Meridian Holdings, Ethan's family business. It is a lot of data, Brenda added. Can you handle it? I can handle it, I said. I opened the first file. It was a digital dump of accounts payable ledgers for the last 6 months. Thousands of lines. Most people would see a headache. I saw a puzzle. I put my headphones in, playing white noise, and started working. The first 3 hours were standard. Utility payments, landscape maintenance for their various properties, office supplies. Vale Meridian Holdings was an umbrella company that owned half the commercial real estate in Ashford Creek, plus interests in logistics and construction. Around 11 o'clock, I found the first snag. It was a reimbursement for a vendor listed as Northwell Consulting. The amount was $4,500. It was coded as admin support. 10 rows down, there was another payment, $4,500. But the vendor was listed as Northwell Cons. Same amount, nearly identical name, different vendor ID in the system. I frowned. In a clean system, vendor names are standardized. You do not have a hyphen in one check and no hyphen in the next unless someone is manually entering them without cross-referencing the master file. I scrolled down. Northwell Civic Strat, $5,000. N. Well Strategies, $3,200. I highlighted the rows. The amounts were all round numbers. No cents. In business. Bills rarely come out to exactly $5,000. There is tax. There are hours multiplied by rates that result in odd figures. Round numbers usually meant estimates, or allowances. I pulled up the vendor master list. There was no Northwell listed with a tax ID number. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. I kept working, cross-referencing the dates. These payments appeared every 2 weeks, almost like a payroll cycle, but they were being processed through accounts payable as vendor reimbursements. That avoided payroll taxes. It also avoided standard employee record trails. My phone buzzed against the desk. I glanced at it, a notification from a group text. I did not recognize the group name. It was just a list of numbers. I opened it. There was an image, a screenshot. My breath hitched. It was a photo of a document. I squinted. It was the header of my Brindle & Company contract. Candidate name, Gabriella Ross. Weekly stipend. $300. Below the image was a caption. Inflation is tough. But some people really do have $300 dreams. At least she has a rich boyfriend to pick up the tab. Ambition, the number that sent it was not saved in my phone. But I knew who it was. I knew the tone. I knew the cruelty. Maris. And then, a second realization hit me, colder than the first. The group chat included about 20 people. I saw names I recognized from the party, and there, at the bottom of the list of recipients, was Ethan. She had included him. She had included me. She wanted me to see that she was laughing at me, and she wanted me to see that she was doing it in front of him. I waited. I stared at the screen, waiting for Ethan to type something, to say stop, to say, that is not funny, to leave the group. The 3 dots of someone typing appeared. LOL, Maris, behave. That was it. That was his defense. Behave, like she was a puppy chewing on a slipper. Not a grown woman dismantling his girlfriend's dignity for sport. I turned the phone over. I placed it face down on the desk. My hands were shaking. I wanted to pack my bag. I wanted to walk out of Brindle and Company, drive to Briarstone House where the Vales lived, and scream until my throat bled. I wanted to quit. I did not want to touch their payroll. I did not want to touch their money or their secrets. I reached for my purse. I was going to leave. Then I remembered the letter on my kitchen counter. I had found it this morning. A notice from the landlord at Creston Row Flats. Due to rising property taxes and market adjustments, your monthly rent will increase by $150, effective immediately. $150, half my weekly stipend. I froze. If I quit, I had $0. If I quit, I was homeless in 30 days. The anger in my chest curdled into something cold and hard. It was the heavy, suffocating weight of necessity. I could not afford pride. I could not afford a dramatic exit. I took my hand off my purse. I picked up the phone. I took a screenshot of the group text. I saved it to a folder on my cloud drive labeled personal. Then I took a screenshot of the timestamp where Ethan had typed LOL. I saved that too. I turned back to the monitor. The spreadsheet was still there. Northwell Consulting. Northwell Cons. I was not going to quit. I was going to work. I started a new spreadsheet. I named it Notes. I copied every instance of the Northwell payments into it. I noted the dates. I noted the lack of invoice numbers. I noted the approval codes. I worked through lunch. I worked until my eyes blurred. That evening, I met Tessa at the diner on 4th Street. Tessa Morrow was a nurse at the county hospital, which meant she had seen humanity at its worst and still managed to be the kindest person I knew. She ordered us coffee and pie, her eyes tracking my movements as I shredded a paper napkin into tiny strips. She sent it to the whole group? Tessa asked, her voice low. Everyone, I said, Ethan included, and he laughed. He typed LOL, which is basically the same thing. Tessa shook her head. He is a coward. Gab, I have told you. He is pretty, but he has no spine. You need to dump him. I cannot, I said, staring at the pile of napkin confetti. Why? Because he pays for dinner? Because he is my connection. I said, I did not mean to say it. It just fell out. Connection to what? To the people who think I am trash, I said. Tessa reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her palm was rough from constant scrubbing. Gabriella, stop. I can see that look in your eyes. The one you get when you are trying to solve a problem that does not have an answer. They are mocking me. Tessa, I know, and they are terrible people. But you cannot go to war with the Vales. They own this town. You are barely making rent. Do not spiral into some revenge fantasy. It never works. You just get hurt worse. I am not spiraling. I lied. I am just observant. Promise me, Tessa said. Promise me you will just keep your head down, find a better job, and get out of here. Do not engage. I looked at my friend. I saw the worry in her face. I promise. I said, I will not engage. I did not promise I would not document. Later that night, Ethan came over. He brought takeout and a bottle of wine. acting as if nothing had happened. He kissed me at the door, but I turned my head so his lips landed on my ear. "Hey," he said, pulling back. "You okay? You seem tense." "Maris sent that text," I said. I was standing in the kitchen, unpacking cartons of pad thai. I did not look at him. He sighed, a long, weary exhalation. "Look, I know. It was in bad taste." "Bad taste?" "Ethan. She posted my contract. That is confidential information. She was just joking. Gabriella, you know how she is. She has a sharp tongue. She does not mean anything by it. It is just family banter. It is bullying." I said. He came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. I stood stiff as a board. "I am sorry," he said into my hair. "I will talk to her. I will tell her to tone it down. Okay? You said that last time." I said, "I know, but it is complicated. She is my sister, and she is stressed about the pavilion project. Just let it go? For me?" I felt his weight leaning on me. He was asking me to carry the burden of his family's cruelty so he could stay comfortable. He wanted peace, but he wanted me to pay for it. "Okay," I said softly. "You are the best," he said, squeezing me. I realized then that he did not love me. He loved that I was low maintenance. He loved that I was a quiet, grateful accessory who made him feel benevolent. When he fell asleep on my couch 2 hours later, I did not join him. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the work files I had cached offline. I went back to the Northwell payments. I needed to see where the money was going. I drilled down into the payment metadata. The system Brindle used was old, but it captured the routing numbers for electronic transfers. I traced the Northwell payments. They were all going to a single account. I looked up the routing number. It belonged to Halewick Heritage Bank. That was the local bank the Vales used for everything. I dug deeper. The account number had a prefix, 88CR, in banking shorthand. CR often stood for Community Relations or Charitable Remainder. I frowned. Why was a vendor reimbursement for consulting going into a charitable account? I cross-referenced the account prefix with the general ledger codes for Vale Meridian. I found a match. 88CR was the internal code for community grant processing. My heart hammered against my ribs. Vale Meridian Holdings was paying a vendor called Northwell for services that did not seem to exist, and the money was routing directly into an account designated for processing community grants. It was a loop. The money was leaving the company as an expense and landing in a bucket meant for charity. And who was the biggest recipient of Vale Meridian's charity? I thought back to the bathroom stall. I thought back to Paula Ketter's voice. The Vales will cover the gap with the bridge arrangement. I sat back in my chair. The glow of the screen illuminated the dark apartment. Ethan snored softly on the couch, a man who thought the world was simple because he had never had to look at the seams. I looked at the number on the screen. I was not just looking at a payroll anomaly. I was looking at the first thread of a knot that tied the Vale family fortune to the Ashford Arts Trust, and I had a feeling that if I pulled it, the whole tapestry would unravel. I saved the file. I named it Recipe. I was not going to sleep. I had work to do. The email I sent to Brenda on Tuesday morning was innocuous. It was the kind of administrative housekeeping that usually gets deleted without a second thought. Subject: Request for historical data continuity. Body: Brenda. To ensure the reconciliation for Vale Meridian aligns with year-end tax protocols, I would like to request read-only access to the prior 3 quarters. It helps me match the vendor codes to the legacy system. Thanks. Gab. Brenda approved it 9 minutes later. She did not care. To her, I was just a woman trying to do a job that no one else wanted to do. She gave me the digital keys to the archive, and I unlocked the door. I sat with my coffee, the steam rising against the cold monitor screen, and I started scrolling backward. I had expected the Northwell payments to be a recent development, a scramble to cover a temporary cash flow problem or a specific project deficit. But the pattern did not start last month. It did not start in the summer. I went back 6 months. There they were, $4,000 here, $6,000 there. I went back 12 months. The payments were smaller, but more frequent. I went back 18 months. The first payment to Northwell Civic Strategies appeared on a Tuesday in February nearly 2 years ago. It was for $2,500. I sat back, the wheels of my chair humming against the plastic floor mat. This was not a mistake. This was not a glitch. This was architecture. Someone had built a pipeline to siphon money out of Vail Meridian Holdings, drop by drop, for years. They had kept the amounts just below the threshold that would trigger an automatic external audit review. Whoever was doing this knew exactly how the system was calibrated. They knew the safety limits. I felt a strange, cold sensation in my stomach. It was not fear. Exactly. It was the feeling of standing on a frozen lake and hearing the ice groan beneath your feet. I was standing on something vast and fragile, and the people walking around me had no idea. That Sunday, I had to pretend the ice was solid. Ethan drove us to Briarstone House for the monthly family dinner. Briarstone was less a home and more a monument to the Vail family's idea of themselves. It was a sprawling colonial estate on the edge of town, set back from the road behind iron gates that always seemed to be closing rather than opening. The driveway was lined with century-old oaks. The house itself was white brick with black shutters, impeccable and imposing. Inside, it smelled of lemon oil, beeswax, and money. We gathered in the drawing room before dinner. Ethan held my hand, his palms slightly damp. He always got nervous around his father, a silent, brooding man named Richard who treated conversation like a tax he was trying to evade. But it was the women who ran Briarstone. Lorraine Vail, Ethan's mother, sat on a floral sofa, sipping sherry. She was a small woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Maris was there, of course, lounging in an armchair, looking bored. I helped serve the drinks, falling into the role of the helpful guest because it gave me something to do with my hands. "Gabriella," Maris said, watching me pour tonic water. "How is the temp life treating you? Still counting other people's change?" Ethan stiffened beside me. "Maris," he said warningly, "I am just asking." Maris said, eyes wide and innocent. "I admire it. Really, it must be so grounding to work for an hourly wage. It really keeps you connected to the common experience." I finished pouring the drink and handed it to her. The glass was heavy crystal. "It is a stipend, actually," I said, "and it is educational. You learn a lot about a family by looking at how they spend their money." The room went quiet for a beat. Maris laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Well, do not look too closely at ours," she said. "You might find out we are boring." I took a sip of my water. I knew for a fact they were not boring. Boring people do not route vendor reimbursements through charitable grant accounts. Dinner was an exercise in endurance. We ate roast lamb on china that was likely older than the concept of the minimum wage. Maris spent 20 minutes describing her recent volunteer work with the Ashford Arts Trust, painting herself as a martyr for the cultural enrichment of the town. "We are just working so hard to get the pavilion expansion fully funded," Maris said, gesturing with her fork. "The community needs this space. It is going to be a beacon. We have raised nearly $2 million, but the last push is always the hardest. People are so tight with their purses lately. It is disheartening. Really, how little people care about legacy." I cut my lamb. $2 million. Ethan nodded enthusiastically. "You are doing great work, Maris. The renderings look amazing." "They are," Maris agreed. "It is going to be the jewel of the Rivermarch district. We just need to make sure the numbers look right for the groundbreaking announcement. Perception is everything." I looked up and caught Lorraine watching me. She was not eating. She was studying me, her head tilted slightly to the side, like a bird watching a worm surface in the garden. After dinner, while the men went to the library to smoke cigars, a cliché they clung to with embarrassing sincerity, Lorraine cornered me in the sunroom. The room was filled with orchids, humid and fragrant. Lorraine motioned for me to sit on a wicker love seat. "You seem unsettled, Gabriella," she said. Her voice was soft, maternal, but it lacked warmth. "I am fine, Lorraine, just tired. The new assignment is demanding." "Yes, Ethan mentioned you are working on the Vail Meridian files now," she said. She adjusted the silk scarf around her neck. That must be tedious. All those numbers. It is just data. I said. Lorraine smiled. You know, I have been thinking, you are a bright young woman. You have resilience. I can see that. It seems beneath you to be bouncing around with a temp agency, especially for such a pittance. She paused, letting the insult about my salary land softly. We have an opening at the Family Foundation, she continued. Vale Meridian Giving. It is an administrative role. Coordinating donor relations. It pays $55,000 a year. Full benefits. It would be a much better fit for you. I think, and it would make Ethan so happy to see you settled. I looked at her. $55,000? It was a lifeline. It was dignity. It was rent that I could pay without panic. But I saw the hook. There is just one standard condition, Lorraine said, waving her hand as if it were a trifle. Because we deal with sensitive family assets. All our foundation employees sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. It covers everything. The foundation, the holding company, family interactions. It is just for everyone's comfort. For everyone's comfort. If I signed that, I could never speak about what I saw. I could never ask questions about Northwell. I would be bought, paid for, and silenced. I looked at the orchids. They were beautiful, but they were growing in a cage of glass. That is a very generous offer. Lorraine, I said. She smiled, assuming the deal was done, but I cannot accept it. I said. Lorraine's smile froze. The corners of her mouth stayed up, but the light behind her eyes went out. Excuse me? She said. I am happy at Brindle for now, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. I like the variety of the work, and I prefer to keep my professional life separate from my personal life. I think it is healthier for my relationship with Ethan. Lorraine stared at me. The silence stretched, thin and tight. She was not used to being refused, and more than that, she was smart enough to wonder why a woman making $300 a week would turn down a real salary. She took a step closer. Her perfume smelled of roses and something metallic. You are a very independent woman. Gabriella, she said, that is admirable, to a point, but independence can be a lonely place. I am used to being alone. I said. Lorraine nodded slowly. I hope you know what you are doing. I did not know what I was doing, but I knew what I wasn't doing. I wasn't signing my voice away for $55,000. The next week at work, the atmosphere felt different. I felt exposed, as if Lorraine's gaze had followed me from the sunroom to my cubicle. I focused on the payroll records. I had mapped the Northwell payments, but I needed to understand the mechanism. How were they getting approved? Every check required a manager's digital signature. I waited until late Friday afternoon. The office was emptying out. Brenda had already left for her weekend trip to the coast. I pulled up the transaction logs. I filtered for the Northwell entries. They all had one thing in common. They were all processed in what the system called a correction batch. In payroll terms, a correction batch is used to fix mistakes, missed hours, wrong tax codes, after the main payroll has run. These batches usually happen on Fridays, right before the bank cutoff. I looked at the timestamps. 4:52 in the afternoon, 4:58, 5:01, always at the very end of the week, always when no one was looking. But here was the key. The approval code. Normally, the approval code corresponded to a specific manager's ID. But for every single Northwell transaction, the approval code was 99 AU Thieth. I did not recognize that code. I searched the user directory. There was no manager named 99 AU Thieth. It was a skeleton key, a universal override code that bypassed the standard approval hierarchy. My heart raced. This was not just someone slipping invoices past a busy manager. This was someone with root access to the financial system. I needed to know what 99 was, but I could not ask Brenda. She would ask why I was digging into system architecture. I thought of Elliot Sane. Elliot was an IT contractor who serviced Vale Meridian's servers. I had met him a few times when my terminal froze. He was a nervous, meticulous man who wore hoodies and drank energy drinks as if they were water. I found him in the server room on the 4th floor. He was rerouting cables, surrounded by the hum of cooling fans. Hey, Elliot, I said. He jumped, dropping a coil of Cat 5 cable. Jesus. Gabriella, you scared me. Sorry. I said, I just had a quick question about the system logic. I am trying to reconcile some old batches. Elliot sighed, picking up the cable. What is it? I have seen a user ID code, 99 AUTF, on some of the old logs. I cannot find it in the directory. Do you know who that belongs to? Elliot went still. He did not look at me. He looked at the server rack, his fingers tightening on the blue wire. Where did you see that? He asked. His voice was low. Just in some correction batches. I said, Is it a system admin? Elliot turned to me. His face was pale. Gabriella, listen to me, he said. You do not want to know what that code is. Why? Because 99 AUTF is a legacy administrative override. It was set up years ago for emergency executive clearance. It does not log the user's IP address. It is a ghost key. Only 3 people have access to it. Who? I asked. I do not know, Elliot said quickly, and I do not want to know, and neither do you. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. Questions travel fast in this company. Gabriella, the network logs everything. If you are querying that code, someone is going to get a flag. If I were you, I would stick to your payroll matching and stop looking at the architecture. You are on a probationary contract. Do not give them a reason to cut you. He turned back to the rack. I have to finish this. Please go. I walked back to my desk, my legs feeling heavy. Emergency executive clearance, a ghost key. I sat at my desk and closed the file. I did not save my search history. That night, I went to Ethan's apartment. I needed to see him. I needed to feel normal. He was watching a game on TV, a beer in his hand. He looked happy, uncomplicated. Hey, he said, patting the cushion beside him. You are late. Everything okay? I sat down, but I did not lean back. Work was intense today. I said. He groaned. God, work. Can we not talk about work? Maris has been blowing up my phone about the pavilion seating chart all day. I am exhausted. I looked at him. He was exhausted by a seating chart. I was exhausted because I had uncovered a systemic embezzlement scheme that implicated his family. Ethan, I said, I need to set a boundary. He muted the TV, looking confused. A boundary? What do you mean? I mean, I do not want to talk about my job with you anymore, and I do not want to talk about your family's business. I need a wall between us and that. Ethan frowned. This is about the dinner, isn't it? Because Mom offered you the job? It is not about the job. I said, it is about safety. Safety? Ethan laughed. A short, incredulous sound. You are a payroll clerk. Gabriella. Not a spy. You are acting weird. I need silence to think. Ethan, please, if you care about me, just respect this. He stared at me, his expression shifting from confusion to defensiveness. You do not trust me, he said. That is what this is. You think my family is out to get you, so you are shutting me out. It is not about you, I said, though it was entirely about him. It was about the fact that he was a leak. Anything I told him would end up with Maris or Lorraine within hours. Fine, Ethan said, turning back to the TV and unmuting it. Keep your secrets. I just think it is sad that you cannot handle a little family intensity. He took a sip of his beer. The volume of the game filled the room. A wall of noise between us. I sat there for 10 minutes. Then I got up and left. He did not ask me to stay. 2 days later, on a Wednesday morning, I received an email on my personal account. Subject, Opportunity at Ashford Arts Trust, from Paula Ketter, Ketter Ashford, Arts Trust, org. Dear Gabriella, I hope this note finds you well. Your name came up recently in a discussion about local finance talent. We have an opening for a finance coordinator here at the Trust, and based on your background, we think you might be a strong fit. I would love to buy you coffee and chat about it. No pressure, just an informational conversation. Best. Paula. I stared at the screen. I had never applied to the Ashford Arts Trust. I had never sent them my resume. My name came up. Where? At the dinner table? In a text message from Maris? Or had someone seen my name on the payroll logs for Vale Meridian and decided it was better to have me inside the tent pissing out, rather than outside pissing in? Lorraine had tried to hire me at the foundation. Now the trust was trying to hire me. They were circling. I should have deleted it. I should have run. But I replied, "Dear Paula, I would be happy to meet." We met at a coffee shop in the River March district, overlooking the construction site of the new pavilion. The steel beams were already rising, skeletal and orange against the gray sky. Paula Ketter was a polished woman in her late 40s, wearing a scarf that probably cost more than my car. She was warm, engaging, and terrifyingly focused. "Gabriella, so glad you could make it," she said, sliding a latte toward me. "Thank you for the invite." I said, "I was surprised. I did not know you were hiring. We are always looking for sharp people." Paula said, "And frankly, we need someone with a forensic eye. Nonprofit finance is messy." She opened a leather portfolio. She slid a glossy brochure across the table. It was the prospectus for the River March Pavilion expansion. "It is exciting, isn't it?" Paula said, tapping the brochure. "This is a $2,500,000 project. It is going to change the face of Ashford Creek. We are fully funded. Of course, the community support has been overwhelming, fully funded." I looked at the rendering. It showed a glass structure glowing in the twilight, filled with happy, blurred people. "It looks ambitious." I said, "It is." Paula said, "The Vales have been instrumental. Truly, they are the backbone of this town." She watched me closely. I kept my face neutral. The role would involve managing the inbound pledges and coordinating with our banking partners. Paula said, "We use Halewick Heritage. Mostly, they handle our grant processing and our capital accounts. We need someone who can ensure the flow is efficient." She said the word flow with a specific emphasis. I looked down at the brochure. My eyes caught the fine print on the back page. Financial partner, Halewick Heritage Bank. Fiscal agent, Northwell Civic Strategies. My blood ran cold. There it was, printed in tiny gray font on the back of a marketing brochure. Northwell Civic Strategies, the same shell company receiving the consulting payments from Vale Meridian Holdings, was listed as the fiscal agent for the Arts Trust. Fiscal agent, that meant Northwell was the intermediary, the middleman handling the money. The loop was closed. Vale Meridian sent money to Northwell. Northwell acted as a fiscal agent for the trust. The trust used the money to claim they were fully funded. It was a circle of fake money. They were moving the same dollars around to inflate the perceived value of the project. I looked up at Paula. She was smiling, waiting for me to be impressed. "It sounds like a complex structure." I said, "Oh, it is," she said. "But that is why we need you. We need someone who understands complexity. Someone discreet." She leaned in. "The salary is $60,000, Gabriella, and we are looking to move quickly, before the end of the quarter. $60,000, double my stipend, and all I had to do was step inside the circle and help them keep the merry-go-round spinning. I will have to think about it." "Paula," I said. "Of course," she said. "Take your time, but not too much time. Opportunities like this do not last forever." I walked out of the coffee shop 10 minutes later. The wind was biting. I looked across the street at the construction site. The skeleton of the pavilion loomed over the river. $2,500,000 of pride. But it wasn't built on pride. It was built on a lie. I got into my car. My hands were shaking as I put the key in the ignition. I had the records from Vale Meridian. I had the brochure from the trust. I had the name of the bank and the shell company. The puzzle pieces were not just touching, they were locking into place. I drove back to my apartment, the silence of the car feeling heavy. I was not just a payroll clerk anymore. I was a witness. And in Ashford Creek, witnesses had a nasty habit of disappearing. One way or another. I needed to secure my files. I needed a backup. And I needed to tell someone who wasn't Ethan. I thought of Tessa. But even Tessa couldn't protect me from this. I was alone. And for the first time, I realized that being alone was not a weakness. It was the only way I was going to survive. I pulled out my phone and dialed the one number I had sworn I would never use. It was the number for a storage unit facility in East Lanton, 3 towns over. I need to rent a unit. I told the voice on the other end. Cash only. I was going to build a clean room. I was going to map every dollar. And when I was done, I wasn't just going to quit. I was going to burn the house down. My dining room table had ceased to be a place for eating. It was now a sterile zone, a physical manifestation of what I called the clean room, in forensic accounting. A clean room is a concept more than a place. It is a file, a data set, a repository of truth that has been isolated from contamination. I had bought a burner laptop with cash at a pawn shop in the next county, wiping its hard drive 3 times before I even turned on the Wi-Fi. I kept it offline mostly, using it only to organize the printed screenshots and hand-transcribed notes I brought home from Brindle and Company. I taped a timeline to the wall behind the table. It was 3 feet long, drawn on the back of wrapping paper. On the left, I listed the Northwell payments leaving Vale Meridian Holdings. On the right, I listed the grant processing deposits at Halewick Heritage Bank. In the middle, I marked the dates of the correction batches authorized by the ghost user 99 AUTF. It was ugly, it was mechanical, but it was starting to look like a map. I was strictly limiting myself to what I could access legally through my job duties. I did not hack passwords. I did not break into offices. I simply looked at the records. I was paid to reconcile. If Vale Meridian Holdings was stupid enough to leave their back door unlocked, I was not guilty of breaking and entering just because I looked inside. The deeper I looked, the more the $2,500,000 figure for the River March Pavilion expansion began to haunt me. It was everywhere. On billboards entering Ashford Creek, in the local paper, on the glossy brochure Paula Ketter had slid across the table. Fully funded, they claimed, a legacy for the future. But in the notes section of a Vale Meridian cash flow report from July, I found a reference that made my stomach turn. Pledge liquidity. The committed capital from the Lanton Group is conditional on Q4 performance metrics. Advise treating as secured for external reporting to satisfy match requirements. I read the sentence 4 times. In the world of nonprofit finance, there is a massive difference between a conditional pledge and a secured gift. A conditional pledge is a maybe. It is an if. You cannot book it as revenue until the condition is met. But the note said, advise treating as secured for external reporting. That was fraud. It was booking money they did not have to trigger matching grants they did not deserve. They were building a $2,500,000 castle on a foundation of quicksand. I pinned a copy of the note to the timeline. My phone buzzed on the table, vibrating against the wood. I ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. I picked it up. It was a notification from Instagram. Maris Vale tagged you in a post. I felt a prickle of dread. I opened the app. The photo was from the cocktail party at the Larkview Conservatory. I remembered the moment. I had been mid-sentence, looking tired and slightly frizzier than intended, holding a half-empty glass of champagne. Maris was next to me, glowing, her head thrown back in a laugh that looked effortless and kind. She had her arm draped around my shoulders, pulling me in, to a stranger. It looked like a moment of friendship. Then I read the caption. So proud of the women in our community who keep pushing forward, even when life knocks them down. It is not about the salary you command, but the spirit you show while you are figuring it out. Everyone starts somewhere. Community support, women helping women fresh. Start. It was a masterclass in assassination. She did not mention the stipend. She did not mention the divorce, but she signaled it all. Life knocks them down. Figuring it out. Everyone starts somewhere. She was framing me as a charity case, a broken bird she was graciously sheltering under her emerald green wing. The comments were already rolling in. You are such an angel. Maris, love this. We all need a hand up sometimes. Is that Ethan's new girl? Bless her heart. She looks sweet. Bless her heart. The Southern polite translation for she is pathetic. I sat there, the blue light of the screen illuminating my anger. It was not just an insult. It was a tactical strike. She was defining my public identity before I could. She was making sure that if I ever spoke up, if I ever pointed a finger at their financial house of cards, no one would listen. They would just see the bitter, struggling woman Maris Vale had tried so hard to help. I drove to Ethan's apartment. I did not call first. He opened the door in sweatpants, looking surprised. "Gabriella?" I held up the phone. "Have you seen it?" He blinked, rubbing the back of his neck. "The post? Yeah, I saw it. And what?" "It is a nice picture. Gab, she said you have spirit." I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. The lock clicked with a sound that felt like a gavel. "Ethan, look at me. She is not complimenting me. She is patronizing me. She is telling the entire town that I am a charity project. Figuring it out? I am 33 years old. I have a degree in accounting. I managed a department. I am not a teenager on a gap year." Ethan sighed, walking into the kitchen to get a water. "You are reading too much into it." Maris uses that inspirational speak all the time. It is her brand. It is humiliation, I said, my voice shaking, "and I need you to fix it." He turned, the bottle of water halfway to his mouth. "Fix it? How?" "I need you to comment on it, or make your own post. Something that corrects the narrative. Say something about my professional experience. Say something that treats me like an equal, not a rescue dog." Ethan lowered the bottle. He looked tired. He looked like a man who was being asked to lift a heavy box he did not want to carry. "Gabriella, if I start a comment war with my sister on Instagram, it is going to look petty. It will just draw more attention to it. I am not asking for a war." I said, "I am asking for defense. I am asking you to stand up for me in public. Not just apologize to me in private. I will," he said. "I promise. I need to wait for the right moment. If I do it now, she will get defensive. We have the groundbreaking ceremony coming up. Everyone is on edge. Let me just find a natural way to bring it up. The right moment." I looked at him, and I saw the truth. There would never be a right moment. The right moment was now, and he was letting it pass because he was afraid of her. He was afraid of the discomfort. He was afraid of disrupting the flow of the Vale family river. "You are not going to do it," I said quietly. "I said I would." Ethan snapped, "Just give me time." God, why does everything have to be a battle with you lately? I walked out. I did not slam the door. I closed it softly, sealing the silence between us. I went back to the clean room. I went back to the numbers. The numbers did not pretend to love me while watching me bleed. 2 days later, on a rainy Tuesday, I was at the copier at Brindle & Company, scanning a stack of invoices. The machine was rhythmic, hypnotic, whir, click, whir, click. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. It was Nina Harrow. I knew Nina by sight. She was Lorraine Vale's personal assistant at Vale Meridian Giving. She was a woman in her 50s, always dressed in beige, always carrying a binder, always fading into the background. She was the kind of person wealthy people treated like furniture. She was standing near the break room door, holding a dripping umbrella. She looked out of place in the Brindle offices. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm looking for the courier pickup." "It is down the hall," I said, pointing. "Last door on the left." "Thank you," she said. She walked past me. As she passed the copier, she stumbled slightly. Her binder tipped. A single sheet of paper fluttered out and landed on the top of my stack of invoices. "Oh," she said, not stopping. Clumsy of me. She kept walking. She did not look back. She turned the corner toward the courier room. I looked down at the paper. It was not a blank sheet. It was a meeting agenda. Vale Meridian. Giving Ashford Arts Trust. Joint Steering Committee. Date, October 12th. Location, Briarstone House, Library. I scanned the bullet points. 1. Q4 disbursement schedule. 2. Donor recognition levels. 3. Reclassifying commitments for audit readiness. My breath hitched. Reclassifying commitments. It was right there in black and white. They were having a meeting specifically to discuss how to change the labels on the money, to turn conditional into secured, to turn loan into gift. I looked down the hall. Nina was gone. She had not dropped it by accident. Nina Harrow had been working for Lorraine Vale for 15 years. She knew where the bodies were buried because she had probably typed up the receipts for the shovels. She had seen me. She had seen Maris's post. Maybe she had felt the sting of 1,000 tiny cuts herself over the years. I folded the agenda and slid it into my bra. It was the safest place I had. This wasn't just family snobbery. This wasn't just Maris being a mean girl. This was reputational laundering. The Vales used their philanthropy to scrub their money clean, and they used their money to scrub their reputation clean. It was a closed loop. They were the saints of Ashford Creek. Provided no one looked at the ledger, I needed legal advice. I could not rely on my own interpretation of fraud. I needed a professional to tell me if I was holding a smoking gun or just a water pistol. Tessa came through. She knew a guy who knew a guy. His name was Kieran Holt. Kieran's office was in a strip mall next to a dry cleaner, 10 miles out of town. The sign on the door said, Employment Law and Civil Litigation. He was a young man, maybe 35, with tired eyes and a tie that was loosened at the collar. He listened to me for 20 minutes without interrupting. I told him about the vendor duplications, the correction batches, the agenda, the shell company. I did not show him the documents. I just described the pattern. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against his lip. You are in a dangerous position. Ms. Ross, he said. I know, I said. That is why I'm here. Is it whistleblower territory? Technically, yes, he said. If they are misrepresenting funds to solicit public donations or government grants, that is fraud. If they are using bank accounts improperly, that is banking fraud. But here is the problem. He leaned forward. Whistleblower protections are not a shield you can just hold up to stop bullets. They are a legal defense you use after you have been fired, sued, or blackened. You have to survive the retaliation first. I can handle retaliation. I said, Can you? He asked. Look at who you are dealing with. The Vales own the narrative in this town. If you come forward, they will not just fire you. They will dismantle you. They will paint you as incompetent, disgruntled, maybe even criminal. They will say you misunderstood the data. They will say you were snooping. I am snooping. I said, Exactly, Kieran said. And that is your vulnerability. You are accessing data outside your scope? Not technically. I said, I have access for reconciliation. Does your job description explicitly state you should be investigating the corporate structure of vendors? No. Then they will say you violated your employment contract. They will say you breached data privacy protocols. He sighed. Truth does not protect you, Gabriella. Not unless your process is bulletproof. You need to document the retaliation. You need to show that they punished you for asking questions, not for breaking rules. He handed me a card. If you are going to do this, do not leak it to the press yet. File a formal internal compliance report first. But they own the compliance process. I argued. I know. Kieran said, but you have to give them the chance to fix it. That is how you establish your legal standing. If you report it internally and they fire you, that is retaliation. If you go straight to the newspapers, you are just a leaker, and they can sue you for defamation and breach of contract. I took the card. File an internal report. It felt like walking into the lion's den and asking the lion to sign a form acknowledging he was hungry. I went back to work the next day with a knot in my stomach. I sat down at my computer and logged in. The screen loaded slowly. The little hourglass spun for 10 seconds, then 20. I clicked on the folder for the Vale Meridian payroll logs. Access denied. I blinked. I clicked it again. Access denied. You do not have permission to view this resource. My heart started to thump. I tried the vendor master file. It opened, but it was read only. I could not sort. I could not filter. I tried to open my email archive. It took a full minute to load. I looked around the office. Brenda was in her glass cube, typing furiously. She did not look at me. I tried to print a document, just a standard timesheet. The printer icon flashed, then vanished. Nothing came out of the machine. Someone was watching my clicks. They knew, or they suspected. Maybe Elliot Sane had talked. Maybe the query for 99 AUTE had triggered a silent alarm in the basement of the IT department. I felt a wave of claustrophobia. The walls of the cubicle felt like they were closing in. I was being throttled. Subtle downgrades, tiny delays, system errors that looked like glitches but felt like handcuffs. I spent the rest of the day pretending to work, moving my mouse, typing nonsense into a blank document. I was terrified to open anything real. That evening, I sat on my floor in the dark. The cleanroom files were in a box under my bed now. I felt fractured. I did not want to destroy anyone. I did not want to be a crusader. I just wanted to do my job, get my paycheck, and go home. But I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't unsee the Northwell payments. I couldn't unsee the agenda. I couldn't unhear the way Maris laughed at my salary while spending my yearly income on a catered brunch. If I stayed silent, I was complicit. I was the payroll clerk stamping the papers that let them steal from the community. I looked at the timeline on the wall. There was one piece missing: Northwell Civic Strategies. I knew the money went there. I knew it was a shell. But who owned it? Kieran Holt had said I needed to be bulletproof. To be bulletproof, I needed a name. I opened my burner laptop. I connected to the hotspot on my phone. I went to the Secretary of State's business entity search. I had tried Northwell before, but I had only looked in the active business registry. This time, I looked in the assumed names database, the registry for doing business as aliases. I typed Northwell. Nothing. I typed North. Well, nothing. I closed my eyes. I thought about the check. Northwell Civic Strategies. Maybe it wasn't registered in this state, but the bank was here. Hallowick Heritage was a local bank. I tried searching by address. I pulled up the vendor file I had saved on my drive. The address for Northwell was listed as 440 Industrial Park Road, Suite 102, East Lanton. I opened Google Maps. I typed in the address, satellite view. It wasn't an office building. It wasn't a civic strategy firm. It was a long, low metal building with orange roll-up doors. East Lanton Self-Storage. Suite 102 was a storage unit. I stared at the screen. A storage unit. They were sending tens of thousands of dollars to a storage unit. I went back to the Secretary of State search. I searched for the address instead of the name. One result popped up. Entity name, NCS, Holdings LLC, Registered Agent, G.R. Keene, Principal Address, 440 Industrial Park Road, Suite 102, East Lanton, G.R. Keene. My brain spun the tumblers. G.R. Keene, Graham Keene, Maris's husband. I sat back, the air leaving my lungs in a rush. Graham Keene, the man who stood silently at parties holding Maris's purse, the man who smiled politely and talked about investments. He was the registered agent. He was the owner of the shell company. Maris wasn't just the beneficiary of the fraud. She was married to the mechanism. I looked at the screen, at the grainy satellite image of the storage facility. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, and the sound it made was deafening. Maris had mocked my $300 salary. She had laughed at my probationary life, but her husband was laundering money through a storage locker in East Lanton to prop up her family's vanity project. I took a screenshot. I saved it to 3 different folders. Then I closed the laptop. I wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had burned off, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. They had money. They had power. They had the social registry. But I had the receipt. And I knew exactly who had signed it. The retaliation did not start with a scream. It started with silence, followed by the slow, grinding friction of bureaucratic gears turning against me. I began my morning by logging into the Brindle & Company time-tracking portal. It usually took 3 seconds to load. Today, it took 30. When it finally resolved, a red banner stretched across the top of the screen. User permissions updated. Please contact your administrator. I clicked on the payroll reconciliation tool. Access restricted. I clicked on the vendor history file. Access restricted. I sat back in my chair. The office hummed around me. Phones ringing. Printers chugging. The low murmur of people who were not being systematically erased from the digital infrastructure. I did not panic. Panic is what they wanted. Panic makes you sloppy. Instead, I opened the snipping tool on my desktop. I took a screenshot of the error message. I saved it to a folder labeled System Errors on my local drive, then copied that folder to a USB drive I kept in my bra. I noted the time, 8:45 in the morning. At 9 o'clock, Brenda called me into her office. Brenda, who usually spent her mornings aggressively ignoring me while chain-smoking on the loading dock, looked uncomfortable. She was shuffling papers, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an exit. "Gabriella, sit down," she said. I sat. The chair was hard plastic. "We need to talk about your output," Brenda said. She did not look at me. She looked at a spot on the wall just above my left ear. "My output?" I asked. "I am 2 days ahead on the Vale Meridian reconciliation." Brenda sighed. She picked up a piece of paper. It looked fresh. The ink was probably still wet. "We have had some reports of inaccuracy," she said. "Data entry errors, coding mistakes. Can you show me?" I asked. "I am happy to correct them." She waved the paper vaguely. "It is a general concern. The client feels you are distracted. They are worried about the integrity of the data. We need you to slow down, focus less on volume and more on compliance." Compliance. That was the word. They did not want me to work faster. They wanted me to stop looking. They wanted me to stop matching vendor codes to shell companies. "I understand." "Brenda," I said, "I will be more careful." I walked back to my desk. I opened a new document. I typed, October 19th, verbal warning from supervisor regarding unspecified inaccuracies. Request for specific examples was denied. I saved the file. The next day, the summons came from higher up. I received an email from an executive assistant I had never met. "Mr. Price would like to see you in his office at 2 o'clock. Please bring your current reconciliation files. Duncan Price, the Chief Financial Officer of Vale Meridian Holdings." A payroll clerk on a $300 stipend does not get called into the CFO's office to discuss reconciliation files. This was not a meeting. It was an interrogation. I printed my files. The clean ones. The ones that showed only what a good little clerk should see. I left the Northwell timeline in the safe box under my bed at home. The Vale Meridian headquarters was a glass tower that looked down on the rest of Ashford Creek, like a feudal lord surveying his serfs. The executive suite on the top floor smelled of expensive leather and fear. Duncan Price was a man who had been manufactured, not born. He wore a suit that cost more than my car, and his smile was a practiced arrangement of teeth that did not reach his eyes. "Gabriella," he said, gesturing to a low leather chair. "Thank you for coming up, Mr. Price," I said. He sat on the edge of his massive mahogany desk, trying to appear casual. It was a power move designed to make me feel small. "We appreciate the work you are doing," he said. "It is not easy. Cleaning up after a reorganization, the Vales are very particular about their records." I nodded. "They seem to be." Price picked up a folder, my folder, the one Brenda had likely passed up the chain. "I was looking through some of your query logs," he said. "You seem to have a very inquisitive mind. You have been pulling records from 3-4 quarters back." I kept my hands folded in my lap. I was just trying to ensure continuity. "Sir, the vendor codes changed during the migration. I wanted to make sure I wasn't creating duplicates." "Of course," Price said. "Continuity." He stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the city, at the river winding through the industrial district where the new pavilion was being built. "You know, Gabriella, accounting is an art as much as a science," he said. I remained silent. "Numbers are black and white," he continued. "But business? Business is gray. Sometimes, transactions are fluid. They serve a purpose that isn't immediately obvious on a spreadsheet." He turned back to me. His eyes were cold. "If you see something that looks unusual, it is often just a matter of context. You lack the strategic view. You are looking at the bricks, but you are missing the cathedral. I am just a payroll clerk." "Mr. Price," I said, "I do not look for cathedrals. I just look for matching tax IDs." He stared at me for a long moment. He was weighing me. He was trying to decide if I was stupid or dangerous. "Just stick to the current quarter. Gabriella, he said softly. For your own sake. We would hate to see you burn out. I left the office with my knees shaking, but my spine was straight. He had confirmed it. They knew I was looking, and they were terrified of what I might find. The invitation from Paula Ketter came 2 days later. It was not an email this time. It was a phone call. Gabriella, she said, her voice bright and breathless. We are convening a small working group for the expansion project, just key stakeholders. I know you haven't officially joined us yet, but I thought it might be a good way for you to see the scope. We are meeting at the Harbor Light Conference Center. I held the phone to my ear. I knew what this was. It was a test, or a trap, or a recruitment drive. They wanted to bring me inside the circle, make me feel special, make me feel like one of them. So I would stop asking questions about where the money came from. I would love to. Paula, I said. The Harbor Light Conference Center was a sterile, modern building near the water. The working group met in a glass-walled room named the Beacon Suite. There were 10 people there, Paula Ketter, 2 members of the Arts Trust Board, a representative from the construction firm, and 3 bankers from Hallowick Heritage. I sat in the back, opening my notebook. Paula stood at the head of the table. She looked tired. The brightness in her voice was starting to fray. Okay, she said. Let us look at the timeline. We want to announce full funding at the gala next Saturday. The press release is already drafted. $2,500,000 raised. One of the bankers cleared his throat. He was a heavy-set man with a red face. Paula, we are still waiting on the execution of the bridge documents, he said. The pledges from the Lanton donors haven't cleared escrow. If you announce full funding and those checks don't cash, we are exposed. We have the coverage, Paula snapped. The Vales have guaranteed the gap. We know, the banker said, but the guarantee is backed by the restricted endowment pool. You know we cannot technically use restricted funds as collateral for a construction loan. It is a compliance nightmare if the regulators look at the liquidity ratios. My pen stopped moving. Restricted endowment pool. In nonprofit finance, there are 2 kinds of money, unrestricted and restricted. Unrestricted money can be used for anything. Keeping the lights on, paying salaries, buying coffee. Restricted money is given by donors for a specific purpose, a scholarship, a specific art acquisition, a future maintenance fund. You cannot touch restricted money for anything else. It is illegal. It is theft. And here they were, discussing using the restricted endowment as collateral for a loan to cover pledges that hadn't arrived, just so they could stand on a stage and brag about having $2,500,000. Paula waved her hand dismissively. It is a short-term liquidity bridge. Tom, 30 days, max. Once the Northwell transfer hits, we pay back the bridge loan, release the collateral. And no one is the wiser. We are just moving buckets around. The Northwell transfer. They were using the shell company to wash the money back into the trust to pay off the illegal loan. I looked down at my notebook. I wrote, bridge loan, collateral, restricted endowment, repayment source, Northwell. I felt a gaze on me. I looked up. Paula was watching me. She wasn't smiling. You see, Gabriella, she said, it is all about cash flow management, just complex mechanics. I forced a smile. It is fascinating. Paula. I left the meeting feeling sick. This wasn't just accounting tricks. This was gambling with other people's money. They were risking the entire future of the Arts Trust, scholarships, grants, community programs, to build a monument to their own ego. That night, Ethan came over. He looked haggard. The stress of the fully funded lie was wearing on him too, even if he didn't understand the mechanics. He paced around my small living room, picking up knickknacks and putting them down. We should go, he said suddenly. I looked up from my laptop. Go where? Away, he said. Leave Ashford Creek, maybe move to Charleston or Savannah. I have friends there. I could get a job in logistics. You could find something better than Brindle. He sat down next to me, taking my hand. His grip was desperate. I am tired of this town. Gabriella, I am tired of my family. I am tired of the pressure. Let us just pack up and go. Start fresh. I looked at him. For a second, I felt a pull. It would be so easy to just get in the car and drive away, to leave the spreadsheets and the secrets and the angry eyes of Maris Vale behind. But then I looked at his face. I didn't see courage. I saw cowardice. He didn't want to leave because he wanted to be with me. He wanted to leave because the kitchen was getting too hot. He sensed the explosion coming, and he wanted to be in another state when the shrapnel flew. We cannot just leave. Ethan, I said, why not? He pleaded. We are free. I am not free. I said, and neither are you. You are just trying to outrun your last name. He dropped my hand. You are obsessed, he said. You are obsessed with taking them down. You think you are some kind of hero, but you are just going to get crushed. I am not trying to be a hero. I said, I am just trying to be honest. Honesty doesn't pay the rent. Gabriella, he shouted. He stood up, running a hand through his hair. You know what? Fine, stay, fight your little war, but don't expect me to be a casualty. He walked out. This time, I knew he wasn't coming back. The sadness I felt was dull, heavy, and brief. It was the sadness of losing something you realized you never really had. 2 nights later was the autumn gala. The Vales were hosting it at the conservatory again. I wasn't invited, of course, but I went anyway. I had a ticket from Tessa, who had gotten it from a doctor at the hospital who couldn't attend. I put on the same navy dress. I put on my armor. The room was glittering. The fully funded banner hung above the stage. Gold letters on black velvet. $2,500,000. I stood near the back, drinking sparkling water. I watched them. Lorraine holding court, Ethan drinking too much scotch near the bar, and Maris. Maris was wearing red tonight. She looked like a flame. She saw me. She excused herself from a circle of admirers and walked straight toward me. She didn't have a drink in her hand. Her hands were free. Gabriella, she said. Her voice was low, intimate. I am surprised to see you. I thought you might be busy looking for a new job. I am still employed. Maris, I said, for now, she said. She stepped closer. She smelled of expensive wine and malice. You are playing a dangerous game, little mouse, she whispered. You think because you saw some numbers on a screen, you understand how the world works. But you don't. You understand arithmetic. We understand power. She smiled. A terrifying, beautiful smile. People like you don't get to change the story. Gabriella, you just get written out of it. I looked at her. I looked at the diamond necklace resting on her collarbone. I looked at the banner behind her head that lied to the entire town. I felt a sudden, absolute calm. The shaking stopped. The fear evaporated. I am not changing the story. Maris, I said. My voice was steady. I am just reading it. Her smile faltered. Just for a second. Then she laughed, patted my arm, and walked away. I left the party. I drove home. I sat down at my table. I pulled out the burner laptop. I went to the Vale Meridian Holdings internal portal. I navigated to the ethics line page. It was an anonymous reporting tool, but I wasn't going to be anonymous. I typed my name, Gabriella Ross. I typed the subject, Internal Controls Violation, Misappropriation of Restricted Funds and Vendor Fraud. I did not upload the stolen documents. That would be a breach of contract. Instead, I wrote a narrative. I have identified a pattern of irregular payments to a vendor listed as Northwell Civic Strategies. These payments are processed via correction batches using a non-standard administrative override code, 99 AUTF. The vendor shares an address with a storage facility in East Lanton. Furthermore, internal discussions within the working group for the River March Pavilion project indicate that restricted charitable funds are being used to collateralize bridge loans to cover funding gaps. I am reporting this in accordance with the company's code of ethics. I read it twice. It was dry. It was factual. It was a grenade with the pin pulled. I clicked submit. The screen flashed. Report received. Reference number 8892B. I took a screenshot of the confirmation. Then I went to bed. I slept better than I had in months. The retaliation was swift. It took exactly 48 hours. On Tuesday morning, I was called into the HR office at Brindle & Company. Brenda was there. along with a woman I didn't know. Gabriella. The woman said, I am the regional director. I am afraid we have some bad news. Due to a sudden budget realignment from our client, Vale Meridian Holdings, they are terminating all probationary contracts effective immediately. All probationary contracts? I asked. Well, yours specifically was flagged for the reduction, she said. It is purely financial, nothing to do with performance. She slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a termination notice. We will pay you for the rest of the week, she said, but you need to clear out your desk today. I signed the paper. I did not argue. I did not cry. I walked back to my desk. I put my mug, my sweater, and my potted succulent into a cardboard box. I felt eyes on me. The other clerks were watching, silent and terrified. They knew I had flown too close to the sun. I walked out of the building. The air was cold and crisp. I got into my car. I picked up my phone. I dialed Kieran Holt. They fired me. I said, good. Kieran said, not good, but expected. Did you file the report? Yes, 2 days ago. Do you have the confirmation? Yes. Then we are in business. Kieran said, come to my office. We are going to draft a preservation letter. We are going to put a legal hold on every server, every email, and every backup tape they have. If they delete a single byte of data from this moment on, they are committing a felony. I drove to Kieran's office. We spent 3 hours drafting the letter. It was a thing of beauty. It demanded the preservation of all records related to Northwell, Hallowick Heritage, and River March Pavilion. We sent it via certified mail and email to Duncan Price, Lorraine Vale, and the legal counsel for the Arts Trust. The war had started. I went home to my apartment. It felt empty without the work files to organize. I felt a sudden crash of exhaustion. I had no job. I had $300 in my bank account. I had a looming rent hike. I sat on the floor, staring at the timeline on the wall. Had I made a mistake? Had I just blown up my life for nothing? A knock on the door made me jump. I froze. Was it Ethan? Was it the police? I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. It was a delivery driver. He was holding a large padded envelope. I opened the door. Sign here, he said. Bored. I signed. I took the envelope. It had no return address. Just my name and address. Typed on a plain white label, I took it to the kitchen table. I opened it. Inside was a stack of photocopies. I started reading. Dear Mrs. Higgins, we are so grateful for your past support. Regarding your pledge for the pavilion, we understand $5,000 is a stretch. However, if you could sign the commitment letter for $20,000. We have arranged for a donor-advised fund to cover the difference of $15,000 on your behalf. This will help us reach our participation goals. I turned the page. Dear Mr. Silva, anonymous partner will subsidize the balance of your pledge. I turned the page. There were dozens of them. Letters to small business owners, teachers, retirees. The Vales had pressured them to pledge amounts they couldn't afford, promising that an anonymous partner would pay the difference. That anonymous partner was Northwell Civic Strategies. They weren't just embezzling money out. They were pumping fake money in. They were inflating the donor list to make it look like the entire town was supporting the project. It was a Ponzi scheme of reputation. I looked at the bottom of the last letter. There was a sticky note attached. It was handwritten in elegant, cramped cursive. They made me type these. I kept copies. Burn them after you read. Or use them. I don't care anymore. There was no signature, but I knew the handwriting. I had seen it on the agenda left at the copier. Nina Harrow. I held the stack of papers. They were heavy. Heavier than the bridge loans. Heavier than the shell company. These letters were the proof that the Vales didn't just steal money. They stole people's integrity. They made the whole town complicit in their lie. I looked at the timeline on my wall. I picked up a red marker. I drew a circle around the entire thing. $2,500,000. It wasn't a pride project. It was a crime scene. And Nina Harrow had just handed me the murder weapon. The office of the State Charity Oversight Division was not designed to intimidate. It was designed to bore. It was a windowless room in the basement of a granite building in the state capitol. filled with gray filing cabinets and the hum of a ventilation system that needed a new filter. I sat across from Ruth Calder. She was a woman who looked like she had been carved out of driftwood, tough, weathered, and impossible to break. She wore reading glasses on a chain and had a stillness about her that made me want to fidget, but I forced myself to sit perfectly still. Kieran Holt sat beside me, his briefcase open. I did not tell her a story. I did not tell her about the humiliation at the cocktail party or the way Maris Vale looked at me like I was a stain on her silk dress. Ruth Calder did not care about my feelings. She cared about statutes. I pushed the binder across the metal table. On October 12th, I said, the steering committee for the Ashford Arts Trust met to discuss reclassifying conditional pledges as secured assets. This agenda confirms the intent. Ruth opened the binder. She did not nod. She just read, on October 19th. I continued. I identified a pattern of payments from Vale Meridian Holdings to a vendor listed as Northwell Civic Strategies. The payments were processed using an administrative override code, 99AUTH, which bypasses standard approval hierarchies. Ruth turned the page. Her finger traced the line I had highlighted. And here, I said, sliding the Secretary of State filing across the table, Northwell Civic Strategies is registered to a storage unit in East Lanton. The registered agent is Graham Keene. He is the brother-in-law of the CEO of Vale Meridian and the husband of a board member of the Arts Trust. Ruth stopped. She looked up over her glasses. Graham Keene, she said. The investment banker? Yes, I said. She looked back down at the papers. She was silent for a long time. The only sound in the room was the hum of the vent. You understand what you are alleging, Ms. Ross, she said. You are alleging that a prominent family foundation and a regional bank are colluding to falsify the financial health of a public charity. I am not alleging it, I said. I am documenting it. Ruth closed the binder. She placed her hand on top of it. We will open a file, she said. Do not speak to the press. Do not speak to the board members. If they contact you, refer them to your counsel. This is going to be slow. Justice usually is. We left the building. The sun was shining outside, blindingly bright. It felt wrong. I felt like the sky should be gray to match the weight of what I had just done. The investigation began in silence. There were no sirens. There were no raids. There were just letters. Formal, terrifying requests for information sent on state letterhead to the compliance officers at Hellewick Heritage Bank and the Ashford Arts Trust. Subpoenas for board minutes. Requests for unredacted bank records, inquiries about donor restriction policies. To the outside world, nothing had changed. In fact, the Vales were louder than ever. 2 weeks after my meeting with Ruth, the Ashford Gazette ran a front-page story. Pavilion expansion ahead of schedule. Vale's pledge, continued support. The article quoted Lorraine Vale. We are thrilled with the momentum. She said, the community has really stepped up. We are fully on track to break ground in January with $2,500,000 in secured gifts. She was doubling down. They were looking the lie right in the face and daring it to blink. I read the paper in my apartment. It was quiet there. Too quiet. My phone had stopped ringing. Ethan had vanished. No texts, no calls, no late-night visits to apologize. He had simply excised me from his life like a tumor. The isolation spread outward. I ran into a mutual friend, a girl named Sarah, who I had gone to brunch with a dozen times, in the produce aisle at the grocery store. She saw me. Her eyes widened, and she immediately turned her cart down the cereal aisle to avoid me. I was radioactive. I was the woman who had attacked the town's golden family. Only Tessa remained. She came over on Thursday nights with cheap wine and a refusal to let me wallow. They are scared. Gab, she said, pouring wine into a water glass. That is why they are icing you out. They think if they ignore you hard enough, you will disappear. It is working. I said, I feel like a ghost. You are not a ghost, Tessa said. You are the only real thing in this town right now. Everyone else is just pretending. Truth looks like betrayal to people who benefit from the lie. Remember that. I tried to remember it, but truth did not pay the bills. The termination from Brindle and Company had been final. I applied for other jobs: administrative assistant, bookkeeper, data entry. I had 3 interviews. They all went well until the final reference check. Then, silence. The veils had a long reach. I was blacklisted. The rent increase at Creston Row Flats kicked in on the 1st of November. I looked at my bank account. I had $1,200 left. I made a choice. I drove my Ford Taurus to a used car lot on the highway. It was a good car. It had high mileage. But the engine was solid. The salesman offered me $2,000. "It is worth 4." I said. "It is worth what I can sell it for," he said. "Take it or leave it." I took it. I walked to the bus stop. I sat on the bench, watching my car, my freedom, disappear into the back of the lot. I felt a lump in my throat so hard it hurt to swallow. I took a job the next day. It wasn't in an office. It was at the regional headquarters for Maple Line Grocers, but not in corporate. I was a night shift accounts temp in the distribution center. My job was to process driver manifests from 11 at night until 7 in the morning. I sat in a small, cold booth near the loading docks, entering mileage and fuel receipts while forklifts beeped and pallets slammed around me. The drivers were rough, tired men who smelled of diesel and coffee. They didn't care about the Arts Trust. They didn't care about the veils. I earned $15 an hour. It was honest work. It was hard work. And every morning, when I walked out into the dawn light, my eyes burning from exhaustion, I felt a strange, jagged kind of pride. I was not folding. 3 weeks into the investigation, Kieran called me. "Ruth Calder wants to see us again," he said. I took the bus to the Capitol. I wore my one good suit, which was starting to feel loose on me. I had lost 10 pounds since the layoff. Ruth looked the same. The office looked the same, but there was a new file on her desk. "We found something," Ruth said. I leaned forward. "When we sent the initial inquiry to Halewick Heritage Bank regarding the grant processing accounts, it triggered an internal flag in their compliance system," she said. "It turns out you are not the first person to ask questions about those accounts." I frowned. "Who else asked?" "A junior auditor at the bank," Ruth said. 6 months ago. He filed an internal whistleblower complaint alleging that the community grant processing accounts were being used to cycle funds between related commercial entities, specifically between Vale Meridian Holdings and a series of blind trusts. 6 months ago, that was before I even started the reconciliation project. "What happened to him?" I asked. "He was transferred to a branch in rural Ohio," Ruth said, "and his report was marked resolved. Clerical error." She opened the file. "But here is the connection. Ms. Ross. His report didn't identify the endpoint. He saw the money leaving the bank, but he couldn't see where it went because it moved to a different institution before coming back. You saw the other side. You saw the vendor invoices." I nodded slowly. "I am the missing connector." "Exactly," Ruth said. "You provided the bridge. We now have a complete circuit. We have the source, the mechanism, and the destination." She looked at me. Her expression softened, just a fraction. "You are not alone in this, Gabriella. You were just the one who refused to be transferred to Ohio." I left the meeting feeling a surge of adrenaline. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't just a bitter ex-girlfriend. I was right, but the veils were not done. 2 days later, Kieran called me again. His voice was tight. "We have received a settlement offer," he said. "From who?" "From Vale Meridian's legal team. They want a meeting. Tomorrow." We met in the conference room of a high-end law firm downtown. The table was mahogany, long enough to land a plane on. Duncan Price was there, and the corporate attorney, but sitting at the head of the table was Lorraine Vale. She looked impeccable in a cream-colored suit. She looked like a grandmother who baked cookies. If the cookies were made of arsenic and influence. "Gabriella," she said, smiling as if we were meeting for tea. "You look tired." "I am working nights." "Lorraine," I said, "it takes a toll." She sighed. "It is such a shame, a waste of talent. We all feel terrible about how things ended with your contract. It was a misunderstanding, a clerical mix-up." She gestured to the lawyer. He slid a document across the table. "We want to make it right," Lorraine said. "We value our community relationships. We do not want bad blood." I looked at the document. Settlement and release of claims. I scanned the numbers. Payment of $120,000. $120,000. My breath caught. That was 4 years of my stipend. That was my car back. That was my rent paid for 5 years. That was a down payment on a house. That was safety. I looked at the terms. Recipient agrees to a complete and permanent non-disclosure regarding all business practices of Vail Meridian Holdings and its affiliates. Recipient agrees to retract all prior statements and reports filed with any oversight bodies. Recipient agrees to a relocation stipend of $10,000, contingent upon establishing residence outside of Ashford County within 60 days. They were paying me to leave, to disappear, to take the money and become a ghost for real. Lorraine was watching me. She saw the hunger in my eyes. She knew I was broke. She knew I was tired. It is a fresh start. Gabriella, she said softly, you can go anywhere. Charleston, Savannah, start over. No one needs to know about this unpleasantness. I looked at the check attached to the agreement. The zeros looked like life rafts floating in a dark ocean. I could take it. I could walk away. Ruth Calder had the evidence. She didn't technically need my testimony anymore. I could sign the paper, take the money, and let the state finish the job. I looked at Kieran. He was stone-faced. He couldn't tell me what to do. I looked at Lorraine. She looked smug. She thought she had won. She thought everyone had a price, and she had just found mine. I thought about Maris. People like you don't get to change the story. I thought about the letters Nina Harrow had given me. The retirees pushed to pledge money they didn't have. The lies wrapped in fancy paper. I pushed the document back an inch. I will consider it, I said. Lorraine smiled. Good. But I have one condition. I said, name it. Lorraine said, I want a clause added. Section 4. Yes? I want a public apology. I said, the room went dead silent. I want a statement. Signed by you and Maris. Acknowledging that my employment was terminated as retaliation for raising compliance concerns, and I want an acknowledgement that the comments made about my salary and my career were professional sabotage. Lorraine's smile vanished. It didn't fade. It simply ceased to exist. We are offering you $120,000, she said. That is the apology. No, I said, that is the hush money. The apology is the admission. Lorraine leaned forward. Her eyes were hard as diamonds. We will never sign that. We will never admit to wrongdoing. It would compromise the reputation of the foundation. Then keep your money. I said. Kieran made a noise in his throat, a warning sound. He knew I was walking away from a fortune, but I wasn't looking at Kieran. I was looking at Lorraine. You think you can buy your way out of the truth. I said, you think because I am poor. I have no pride. But my pride isn't for sale. Lorraine, and neither is the truth. I stood up. My legs were trembling. My hands were shaking. I wanted the money so bad I could taste it, but I wanted my dignity more. We are done here, I said. I walked out. I heard Kieran gathering his papers and following me. In the elevator, Kieran looked at me. You know that was a lot of money. Gabriella. I know. I said, you know we might lose. I know. I said, but if I took it, I would have lost already. The refusal to settle was a declaration of war, and the Vails escalated. 3 days later, news broke that a senior loan officer at Halewick Heritage Bank had been suspended pending an internal review. The bank didn't name him, but the grapevine in Ashford Creek was faster than fiber optics. It was the officer who had managed the Arts Trust accounts. The Vails spun it instantly. Maris hosted a brunch that Sunday. It was billed as a Women in Leadership Summit. She held it at the country club. I heard about it from Tessa, who had a friend waiting tables there. Maris stood up in front of 50 of the most influential women in town. She didn't use my name. She didn't have to. It is so important that we support each other, Maris said, according to Tessa's friend. But we also have to protect our institutions from instability. Sadly, there are people, resentful, unstable people, who want to tear down what we have built. They spread rumors because they failed to launch their own lives. It is a form of pathology. Really, We have to pray for them. She painted me as crazy, as a stalker, as a woman who couldn't handle a breakup and was trying to burn down her ex-boyfriend's family out of spite. It was effective. I received a letter from my landlord the next day. A lease non-renewal notice. I had 30 days to vacate Creston Row Flats. I was being erased from the town. But Maris had made a mistake. She thought this was a social battle. She thought if she won the brunch, she won the war. She didn't know about Nina Harrow. I went to Kieran's office that night. I brought the envelope Nina had given me. I am ready to submit these, I said. Kieran looked at the donor pressure letters. He looked at the sticky note from Nina. This is nuclear. Gabriella, he said. If we submit these to the regulator, they become part of the official investigation file. They might eventually become public record. Do it, I said. We drafted a verified statement. I attached the letters. I attached the map of the shell company. I attached the timeline. We submitted it to Ruth Calder the next morning. The reaction was not immediate public explosion. It was a subterranean tremor. Ruth Calder issued a formal request for comment to the Ashford Arts Trust regarding the specific donor letters. The board of the Arts Trust panicked. They realized the Vales had exposed them to fraud charges. Leaks started to spring, and then Jonah Wren called. Jonah was a reporter for the Ashford Gazette. He was young, hungry, and had been stuck covering high school sports for 2 years. He had been sniffing around the senior officer suspension at the bank. I did not speak to him directly. I honored my instruction from Ruth. But Kieran spoke to him. Kieran gave him the context of the verified statement filed with the state. On a Sunday morning in December, the story dropped. I walked to the gas station near the Maple Line Distribution Center after my shift. I bought a coffee and a paper. There it was, above the fold. Pavilion funding in question. Regulators probe, bridge financing, and donor pressure. By Jonah Wren. I stood in the cold parking lot and read, State investigators are examining allegations that the River March Pavilion expansion, touted as fully funded with $2,500,000 in gifts, is relying on high-interest bridge loans backed by restricted charitable assets. Documents reviewed by the Gazette suggest that a significant portion of the pledged capital has not been received, and that donors were pressured to sign commitment letters with the promise of third-party subsidies. The article didn't mention me by name. It cited confidential complaints and state filings, but it mentioned Northwell Civic Strategies. It mentioned the bridge loans, and it quoted a spokesperson for the Larson Foundation, one of the biggest regional sponsors. In light of the allegations, the Larson Foundation is pausing its capital commitment pending a full audit of the project's governance. Pausing the commitment, the first domino had fallen. I looked at the picture on the front page. It was a photo of the construction site. The steel beams looked stark and lonely against the gray sky. The $2,500,000 Pride project was teetering. I folded the paper and put it in my bag. I had to walk home. I had to sleep before my next shift. I was broke. I was about to be homeless. I was exhausted. But as I walked down the street, passing the houses of the people who had laughed at my $300 stipend, I felt lighter than I had in years. They had tried to buy my silence for $120,000. Now, their silence was about to cost them everything. The collapse of a monument does not happen all at once. It happens in stages. First, the hairline fractures appear in the foundation. Then, the weight shifts. And finally, gravity takes over for the Ashford Arts Trust. Gravity arrived on a Tuesday morning in the form of a press release sent from the personal email account of the board chair, effective immediately. Paula Ketter is stepping down from her role as executive director to focus on urgent personal health matters. The board thanks her for her years of service. Health matters. It was the corporate euphemism for caught red-handed. Paula had not resigned because she was sick. She had resigned because the internal emails leaked by a terrified junior staffer had made her position untenable. The emails were published on a local investigative blog before the ink on her resignation was dry. They were damning not because of what they admitted, but because of how they tried to hide it. Subject: Q4. Optics: From Paula Ketter, Board Executive Committee. We need to be careful with the conditional language in the donor updates. If we flag the Lantern pledges as pending, it triggers a review from the major sponsors. Let us stick to committed capital for the press materials. It is technically true if we count the verbal assurances from the Vales. Technically true. That was the phrase that killed them. In the world of finance, technically true is usually a synonym for materially misleading. I read the emails on my phone during my break at the Maple Line Distribution Center. I was sitting on a crate of oranges, wearing a reflective vest, my hands stained with toner from the manifest printer. I did not feel a rush of victory. I felt a grim satisfaction. The truth was finally wearing its own face. By Wednesday, the contagion had spread to the money. Hallowick Heritage Bank, under intense pressure from state regulators, froze the accounts associated with the River March Pavilion project. They had to. If they allowed one more dollar to move between the restricted endowment and the construction operating account, they would be risking their charter. The effect was immediate. I drove past the construction site on my way home from the night shift. For months, it had been a hive of activity. Cranes swinging, jackhammers rattling, the air thick with dust and progress. Now, it was silent. The steel beams of the half-finished structure rose into the gray winter sky like the ribs of a dead whale. The construction company, unpaid for 2 cycles, had walked off the job. They had wrapped the exposed metal in heavy blue plastic to protect it from the elements. The wind whipped the plastic, making a lonely snapping sound that echoed across the river. The banner was still there, zip-tied to the chain-link fence. The future of Ashford Creek, fully funded. Opening spring. Someone had come by in the night and spray-painted over the words, fully funded. They had painted a single, large question mark in bright red. The $2,500,000 pride of the Vale family was now a plastic-wrapped ruin. I received the subpoena on a Thursday. It was delivered to my new address, a month-to-month efficiency apartment on the south side of town that smelled faintly of boiled cabbage. The process server was polite. He handed me the envelope and touched the brim of his cap. You are hereby commanded to appear before the State Charity Oversight Commission to provide testimony regarding the financial practices of Vale Meridian Holdings and the Ashford Arts Trust. I did not need a lawyer to tell me what to do. I called Kieran Holt anyway. Just tell the truth. Gabriella. He said, you are not on trial. You are the evidence. The hearing room was in the state capitol, 3 hours away. It was not a courtroom. It was a conference room with a long table and a stenographer who typed with a rhythm that reminded me of rain hitting a tin roof. Ruth Calder sat at the head of the table. 2 other investigators sat beside her. I sat alone. Ms. Ross, Ruth said, please state your name and former occupation for the record. Gabriella Ross. I said, formerly a payroll reconciliation clerk for Brindle and Company, assigned to Vale Meridian Holdings. Ruth nodded. She did not smile. She was all business. Can you describe the irregularity you discovered in the vendor master file? She asked. I took a breath. I looked at my hands. They were steady. I observed a series of payments to a vendor listed as Northwell Civic Strategies. I said, the payments were consistent in amount. $4,500, $5,000, but inconsistent in coding. They were marked as consulting fees, administrative support, and logistical retainers. And why did this raise a flag? Ruth asked. Because the vendor had no tax ID listed in the primary database, I said, and because the payments were always processed on Friday afternoons using an override code. What was the code? 99AUTH. I said, the stenographer's keys clattered. 99AUTH. And what happened when you inquired about this code? I was warned by the IT contractor that it was an executive ghost key. I said, and shortly after, my system access was throttled. My permissions were downgraded. I was blocked from viewing historical data. Did you report this internally? Yes, I said. I filed a report through the ethics line on October 21st. And what was the result? I was terminated 48 hours later. I said, the reason given was budget realignment. Ruth looked at me over her glasses. Did you ever speak to the principals of Vale Meridian regarding these payments? I spoke to Duncan Price, the CFO. I said, he told me that business is gray and that I lack the strategic view. I paused. He told me I was looking at the bricks, but missing the cathedral. Ruth wrote something down on her legal pad, I think, she said dryly. The cathedral is now missing its bricks. The testimony lasted 4 hours. I walked them through the timeline. I showed them the connection to the grant processing accounts. I explained the bridge loans. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I did not try to be charming. I just laid the bricks of the truth, one by one, until they formed a wall that the Vales could not climb over. When I walked out of the hearing room, I felt drained, but clean. I had carried this weight for months. Now, it was on the record. It belonged to the state. The investigation moved from the payroll clerk to the power players. Graham Keene was called in the following week. I was not there, but Kieran heard the details from a colleague. Graham walked in wearing a $3,000 suit, flanked by 2 attorneys from a white shoe firm. He looked confident. He looked like a man who believed that rules were suggestions for poor people. He claimed that Northwell Civic Strategies was a legitimate consulting firm. We provided strategic guidance on donor cultivation, he told the investigators. The fees were for high-level advisory services. Then Ruth Calder produced the bank records. Mr. Keene, she said, we have traced the flow of funds. On November 3rd, Vale Meridian Holdings transferred $6,000 to Northwell. On November 5th, Northwell transferred $5,800 to the Ashford Arts Trust under the label Anonymous Donor Match. She slid a paper across the table, and on November 6th, the Arts Trust used those funds to pay interest on a bridge loan that was collateralized by their restricted endowment. Graham Keene stared at the paper. This is not consulting. Mr. Keene, Ruth said, this is a washing machine. You were taking money from your brother-in-law's company, running it through a storage unit you control, and depositing it into the charity your wife sits on the board of, all to create the illusion of independent donor activity. Graham Keene stopped talking. His lawyer started whispering. The illusion was shattering. The timeline of the shell company registration matched the timeline of the pledge inflation perfectly. Every time the Arts Trust announced a new milestone. Northwell had received a cash injection from Vale Meridian a few days prior. It was a closed loop of vanity. The Vales were donating their own money, but hiding it to make it look like the community loved them, and they were using the charity's own savings to pay for the privilege. The fallout in Ashford Creek was visceral. The Vales were not just rich people anymore. They were liabilities. The Larson Foundation formally withdrew their support. Then the Community Development Block grant was suspended. The hospital board, sensing the radioactive nature of the Vale name, quietly removed Lorraine from the upcoming gala committee. I was at my apartment, packing a box of books. When the knock came, it was Saturday afternoon. I was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt that said, Maple Line Logistics. I opened the door. Ethan stood in the hallway. He looked thinner. His hair was messy, as if he had been running his hands through it for hours. He was wearing a raincoat that was wet from the drizzle outside. Gabriella, he said. I did not invite him in. I stood in the doorway, my hand on the latch. What do you want? Ethan? I asked. He looked past me into the apartment. It was small, cramped, and smelled of the neighbors' cooking. It was a far cry from the high ceilings of Briarstone House. I wanted to see you, he said. You have seen me. I said, please, he said. Can we just talk? I stepped back, letting him enter. He stood in the middle of the room, looking uncomfortable. It is a mess. Gabriella, he said. The whole town is talking. My mother is having heart palpitations. Maris is falling apart. Graham might be facing criminal charges. I stood by the kitchen counter. I'm sorry to hear that. I said, but I did not tell Graham to register a shell company. Ethan turned to me. His eyes were pleading. You have to stop, he said. Stop what? I asked. Stop. Pushing. Stop testifying. Just let it go. You have made your point. You proved you were smart. You proved you were right. Isn't that enough? I looked at him. I looked at the handsome face I had once thought was the answer to my loneliness. He did not understand. He thought this was about ego. He thought I was doing this to win an argument. He did not understand that once you turn on the light, you cannot just turn it off because the cockroaches are uncomfortable. I cannot stop. Ethan, I said, the state has the files. It is out of my hands. You could recant, he said. You could say you misunderstood the data. You could say it was a difference of interpretation. If you soften your testimony, the regulators might settle for a fine instead of this. He gestured to the window, to the world outside, where his family's legacy was burning down. Why would I do that? I asked. Because we could go back to how it was, he said. Before all this, we were happy. Gabriella, weren't we? I looked at him, and the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was an aching, clear clarity. He did not miss me. He missed the ease I provided. He missed the version of me that was quiet, grateful, and small. He missed the girlfriend who didn't ask questions about where the money came from. He wanted his accessory back. We were never happy. Ethan, I said softly, you were comfortable, and I was convenient. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. I am not convenient anymore, I said. He stood there for a long moment. Then, the anger flickered behind his eyes, the petulant anger of a child who has been told no. You are ruining everything, he said. No, Ethan, I said. I am just the one who stopped fixing it. He left. He slammed the door. I locked it behind him. I felt a wave of sadness. But it passed quickly, like a cloud moving over the sun. 2 weeks later, the regulator released the preliminary findings. It was a 30-page document. It used words like gross negligence, misrepresentation of assets, and breach of fiduciary duty. The Commission finds credible evidence that the Ashford Arts Trust, in coordination with external parties, artificially inflated pledge totals to secure public financing. Furthermore, the use of restricted endowment funds to collateralize bridge loans constitutes a violation of state charitable trust laws. The Arts Trust was fined $50,000, but the real cost was the sponsorships. Major donors pulled out. The construction contract was voided. The River March Pavilion project was officially suspended. Hallowick Heritage Bank entered into a consent order with the Banking Commission, agreeing to an external audit of all related party transactions, and Vale Meridian Giving, the family foundation, was placed under enhanced oversight status. The $2,500,000 Pride project was dead. The beams would be taken down, sold for scrap metal. I was at work at the distribution center when I got the call from Lorraine Vale's office. Nina Harrow was on the line. Her voice was shaking. Mrs. Vale would like to speak with you, she said. She is holding for you. I put down my pen. Put her through. Nina. There was a click. Gabriella, Lorraine said. Her voice was not the voice of the imperious matriarch anymore. It was thinner, brittle, but the steel was still there, buried deep. Lorraine, I said, we have read the findings, she said. It is a difficult time. I waited. We are looking to restructure the board of the Arts Trust, she said. We need to signal a new direction, a commitment to transparency. She paused. We would like to offer you a seat on the board. Gabriella. I nearly laughed. It was so audacious it was almost impressive. You want me on the board? I asked. It makes sense, Lorraine said, her voice gaining strength. You are the one who identified the gaps. Who better to oversee the compliance? We could frame it as a partnership. You could be the face of the reform. Local accountant helps historic trust modernize. It would be a very powerful narrative. It would restore trust. She was trying to buy me again, not with money this time, but with validation. She was trying to turn me into a prop. She wanted to wear me like a brooch to prove she was clean. If I said yes, I would be one of them. I would be inside the circle. I would be respected, but I would be a lie. I am not your redemption arc. Lorraine, I said. Gabriella. Be reasonable, she said. You work in a warehouse. This is a path back to a professional life. We can help you. I do not need your help, I said, and I will not be your moral ornament. You broke it. You fix it. Or let it stay broken. I don't care. I hung up the phone. I sat in the cold booth, listening to the forklifts beep. I looked at the manifest in front of me. Pallet 404. Canned peaches. I was a warehouse clerk. I had no board seat. I had no money, but I was free. The job offer came 3 days later. It wasn't from a local firm. It was from a company called Dovetail Compliance Partners, based in Raleigh. Kieran had sent them my resume, along with a redacted copy of the verified statement I had filed with the state. The hiring manager, a man named David, called me. I read your file. He said, "The detail is obsessive. The cross-referencing is paranoid." I tensed, waiting for the rejection. "We love it," he said. "We investigate healthcare fraud. We need people who look at the bricks to find the cracks in the cathedral. We need people who don't blink." He offered me a job as a junior forensic analyst. The salary was $65,000 a year. It wasn't a fortune. It wasn't the millions the Vales played with, but it was real. It was a salary, not a stipend. It was built on my skill, not on who I was dating or who I was willing to lie for. I accepted on the spot. I spent my last weekend in Ashford Creek packing the Taurus. I drove past Briarstone House one last time. The gates were closed. The lights were off in the drawing room. They were still rich. They would always be rich. They would survive this. They would rewrite history in their own minds until they were the victims of a bitter, confused woman. But the town knew. The plastic-wrapped beams on the river knew. And I knew. I drove past the construction site. The question mark was still painted on the banner. I smiled. I hit the highway, heading south. I watched Ashford Creek disappear in my rearview mirror. They had mocked my $300 salary. They had laughed at my life. I didn't take their money. I didn't take their status. I took the one thing they couldn't afford to lose. I took their pride, and I left them with the truth. It was a fair trade. Thank you for listening to this story. It has been a journey through the tangled webs of pride, money, and the quiet power of keeping the receipts. I would love to hear your thoughts on Gabriella's choice. Did she do the right thing by walking away from the settlement? Please leave a comment letting me know where you are listening from. It is always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Revenge Stories for more tales of justice served cold. Share your thoughts in English in the comments below.